Welcome, travelers, to my realm of nightmares. Allow me to be your personal assistant. Come in, take a seat, get comfortable. For when you step into my realm, there's no stepping out.
Hello, travelers. PA Nightmares here. I've noticed that over 30% of my viewers are not subscribed to the channel. So, if you're a new or a returning viewer and you haven't subscribed to the channel, please consider hitting that subscribe button. And if you like what I do, liking the video and commenting as well, as it really helps push this video into the algorithm and it really does help the channel grow. Well, I've taken enough of your time. On to the main event. Everyone says that right before you die, you flash back on your life up till that point. They say this flashback takes a fraction of a second, but that's all you need to remember everything you've experienced and come to terms with the fact that you won't be experiencing anything anymore, ever again. I wonder, is there any way to prove this pre-death flashback really occurs? And in a more philosophical sense, if it can be proved, does it even matter? I say it matters, to me at least, because I'd prefer to believe that Rose wasn't forced to relive her darkest moments before it all ended. When I knew her, Rose Williams was 20 years old, slim but gained weight, her jet black hair grown into her natural blonde at the roots. She wore thick glasses when she didn't care, contacts when she did. Rose was a Midwestern girl, but she didn't want to be. She walked, talked, and acted like a rich valley girl, whose existence was defined by which flavor of LaCroix she was drinking. I believed the act too, at least till I heard she was from Wyoming. When Rose turned 18, she did what her friends and family expected. She moved as far away from Wyoming as possible. This took the form of attending an insignificant community college in Ohio. Probably her last choice, but the only one that accepted her. Everyone figured she'd have her pick of schools after playing the sympathy card, but it turned out most colleges didn't want the drama of a student struggling through PTSD. And she was, even if she didn't know it, struggling with PTSD. That is because Rose was part of a high school class that gave birth to the urban legend known as Mackenzie Weaker. Back when Rose and I met, the name didn't mean anything to me or the general public. We didn't have all the documentaries and memes and Halloween costumes centered around her that you'll see nowadays. I didn't see so much as a Facebook post when Mackenzie allegedly dug herself up from the grave, and it didn't make national news when her boyfriend was murdered on the anniversary of her massacre. By the time Rose and I were friends, we shared a Spanish class where she was the only student I could actually stand. I won't get into the poor life choices that led to me also enrolling at a mediocre community college in Ohio, because that story isn't half as interesting or horrifying as hers. I got to campus late February 15th, 2014, and found Rose sitting outside on one of the pockmarked wooden benches the administration didn't feel like replacing. She was wearing sweatpants and glasses, which I knew meant she hadn't planned on trying today. But the fact that she was outside, smoking, while class went on without her, told me there was something else going on. "Hey, what's up?" I said, stopping by her bench. I knew I was late, but there was still time to argue against being marked absent.
"What's up?"
she repeated, not looking up at me, a lit cigarette forgotten in her other hand. I was silent for a moment, giving her a chance to actually acknowledge me, but she kept reading whatever was on her screen in silence. Her leg was bouncing with nervous energy. "What's up?" I said again. Then, "Hey!" Finally, she looked up at me, and for a second, I didn't know what I was seeing. Her eyes usually jittered with excitement at any proposal. Her eyes were wide and empty, overflowing with what I could only identify as some part fear, some part sadness. She wasn't crying, at least not literally. I could sense tears behind her eyes, a non-physical manifestation of whatever she was experiencing. Are you okay? I asked, taken aback. I hardly recognized her without that glint of mischief in her eyes, the smirk she would flash before stealing someone's cigarettes out of their purse or blocking a one-night stand's phone number.
Yeah.
She breathed. She couldn't have sounded less convincing. What's that? I nodded to her phone.
Just Facebook?
Rose, I said, and waited till she looked me in the eyes again. What is the matter? She looked down at her phone, then silently handed it to me. What I saw was a lengthy Facebook post written by the police department of a town I had never heard of, but the post didn't make any sense, at least not as I skimmed its contents. They were talking about a murderer, but also grave robbing. The word sword appeared once or twice, and I couldn't imagine how that possibly fit in with modern day police reports. What is this? I asked.
Just read it.
She murmured, and I caught her implication. She couldn't or wouldn't explain it aloud. The post, of course, was about Mackenzie Weaver, about the murder of her old boyfriend, but the cops didn't know that, and I sure as hell didn't either. The actual post was an unofficial admission that there had been a string of murders somewhere, and that the culprit had not been apprehended. The victims were unconnected, and most of them killed with a sharp weapon too big to be a knife. It was a disturbing story, but I couldn't see why it had affected Rose so much. Did you know one of them? I asked, handing her back the phone. She seemed to remember she was holding a now spent cigarette and dropped it on the ground. Lighting a new one with shaking fingers, I was definitely going to be marked absent.
Not really.
She said, as if that explained everything. So, you knew one of them a little bit? I asked.
I can't talk about it right now.
She said, in no way implying she would ever be able to talk about it. Okay, I offered lamely. She was obviously freaked out for some reason or another, but I couldn't offer a solution or even support her if she wasn't going to explain. Wanna talk about something else?
Just go inside.
She said, then as if trying to cover up for her brusqueness.
I'll see you after class?
Yeah, I replied, and left it at that. I didn't see her for the rest of the day, and silently accepted that she'd only asked to get rid of me. There was a lump in my throat as I pushed through my homework, maybe stupidly, since there was apparently nothing wrong with her, but I was worried. In hindsight being 2020, I should have been a lot more worried than I was. When I saw Rose again 2 days later, she looked even worse. She usually didn't put a lot of effort into her appearance. We had that in common, but that day, I could tell at a glance she was depressed, or at least in a very bad headspace. She was in class, but only physically. I must have been very dehydrated, being that she kept drinking out of an opaque bottle that I could only assume was full of nice refreshing water. I must have asked her if she was okay again, because I distinctly remember her hitting me with that classic,
Yes, I'm fine.
It wasn't until a couple days later that I worked up the nerve to ask her what was going on, and if I could do anything to help. She responded with about as much annoyance as I expected, but apparently couldn't keep it to herself anymore, because she finally told me.
You know about school shootings?
Was how she phrased it. Yes, I said. I did know about school shootings. I lived in America my entire life. I know about school shootings.
Something like that happened to me.
She continued.
Last year, this girl at my school, she...
Jesus Christ, I said, after her voice had trailed off. We were standing in her apartment kitchen, and she was slumped against the fridge as she spoke.
It wasn't a gun.
She said quickly.
It was like a sword, but like one of those curved ones.
A cutlass? I supplied. She nodded.
This girl,
Her voice choked off, and it took a second for her to get the name out.
Mackenzie, she just, like, lost her shit one day and killed some of my friends. And Then the cops got her.
She shrugged and looked away, as though I was supposed to think she didn't care all that much. The apartment seemed colder than it had a minute ago, as I considered what she was saying. I didn't know about Mackenzie back then, and I'd never heard this side of Rose's high school experience. But now that I thought about it, I should have at least seen that she was hanging on to something. She had a cat, a little brown thing named Lexi, who she'd carried right into Spanish class a couple of times with no argument from the professor. I realized now that Lexi was an emotional support animal, and that some days Rose would think too hard about Spanish class and remember a particular murderous blonde she had Spanish with the year before. That, plus the way Rose would sometimes shut off. We'd be out in Findlay, sneaking into bars and seeing concerts. When she would go silent and still, sometimes it would take me a few minutes to notice, but when I did, she would write it off as suddenly losing a caffeine rush. I'd never thought twice about Rose's smoking habit, but after finding out the truth, I had to wonder if she picked it up as a way to ground herself after what happened. So then, I began after a minute, hoping I wasn't phrasing the question in an offensive way. I mean, you've been particularly affected recently, right? How does that... A new thought occurred to me. Is it the anniversary?
That's part of it,
She admitted.
but not all of it.
Then, what is it? I asked. She shot me a look, and I couldn't tell if I was annoying her, threatening to bring back the memories she tried to bury, but she answered the question.
That Facebook post I was reading?
The one about the murders?
Yeah. A week ago. That was her.
Something twisted in my gut. I knew I'd misunderstood, that she technically hadn't said Mackenzie died. But for a split second there, as her words echoed in my ears, I almost allowed myself to believe the other possibility, the impossible, that my mind had jumped to. I cleared my throat. When you said the cops got her,
Yeah.
she interrupted.
They killed her. They killed her. Okay? They shot her in the head. They buried her. Then a few months later, someone dug her up.
I somehow managed to stumble on my feet. Though I'd been standing still, Rose was looking away from me, watching Lexi step weightlessly around the kitchen counter. For the first time, I wonder if she was going to hurt me.
But no one really dug her up.
Rose continued, her voice a bitter monotone.
They didn't catch anyone, and all the dirt was pushed to both sides of the grave, like someone was going out, not in.
Rose, I said, and for a second, I couldn't think of how to continue. That's... no offense, but that's ridiculous.
Yeah,
She shot back.
I thought so too when I heard about it, but then I asked my psychic about it.
I was almost relieved at the grounded reference. Rose and I had been arguing off and on about her psychic for the better part of 4 months. After signing away my freshman year into a near indentured friendship with her, I'd found out she was one of those middle-class white girls who paid an old woman with an accent an obscene amount of money to tell them they would have good fortune in upcoming months. She believed her psychic more than I'd ever known a Catholic to believe in the Pope. I tried to tell her she couldn't believe in precognition, while writing off all religion as outdated superstition, but she would always tell me to stop challenging her belief and kept shelling out her parents' money to some lady wearing a fake turban in a dark basement. Rose, I said, knowing I was treading on thin ice, you can't believe...
Yeah.
She jumped in.
I do believe it. I believe what she says, and that she said Mackenzie was back to finish what she started.
She's just playing off what you're afraid of, I retorted. That's what they do. That's how they make their money.
No, she's not.
Rose shot back.
'Cause I didn't tell her Mackenzie's name.
That simple statement, spoke in my friend's typical indignant tone, hung in the air like secondhand smoke. I crossed my arms against the cold and against the shadows. She could have researched you, I muttered, hardly loud enough for myself to hear. I was pulling at straws, There was no real argument to be made, other than that Rose was lying, and maybe she was. But that would just mean she was desperate to prove herself right.
She's back.
Rose said, not bothering to counter my point.
She's gonna try and kill everyone she missed.
Back then, I couldn't picture Mackenzie Weaver. I didn't know her preference for the tank splatter mask, or the way the bullet wound was still visible across her skull. Back then, when I heard my best friend talking about an undead teenager coming back to murder her, all I could picture were dark, twisted images, like some ethereal comic book in my head. A black, impressionist landscape, twisted trees, and crosses bearing bloody gods reaching towards the skies, weeping dark rain. And at the center of it all, bending all nature's laws around her to slip through the cracks, a small girl with skin white as bone, inky blood drooling down a skull with no face as she pulled herself back to the surface of the earth and into the world of the living. She had escaped hell, and she wouldn't return unless she dragged 149 souls down with her. The moving images, my rebellious mind's interpretation of Mackenzie's resurrection, was playing on a loop in my head as I drove home that night. I never thought I could feel afraid in my car, knowing there was a ton and a half of steel and glass between me and the rest of the world. But Mackenzie, or my image of her, wasn't some panhandling hobo or wild animal. It was something else entirely, something out of this world. As long as that drive home seemed, with every tree branch looking like a rusty cutlass, and every pothole like a tunnel up from Hades, it didn't take long for me to stop thinking about Mackenzie Weaver. Rose apparently adjusted to living with her psychic's predictions, though I figured she secretly knew it was bullshit. If Mackenzie was a force of the supernatural, she could have killed Rose a long time ago. I wondered a couple times what made Rose think the murders on the other side of the country were committed by her dead classmate. Eventually, I decided she had known the victim that died 19 years old, that I now know used to be Mackenzie's boyfriend. Then I found myself wondering for the first time why Mackenzie had snapped in the first place. Had someone done something to her? Why would she hold a grudge against Rose, living or undead? I wanted to ask her, but I couldn't bring myself to dredge it up again. Plus, Rose and I were hanging out less and less as the year pushed on. By May, I found a new group in Spanish class, and she had resigned herself to silently working in the back of the room, headphones on, and fingers twitching nervously in the absence of a cigarette. On the last day of school, Rose wasn't even in class. I showed up late and dicked around with the guys, knowing at this point our grades were locked in. I had finally finished freshman year, 9 months of confusing classes, and calling my parents for advice on the most basic adult functions. I was halfway through my community college career, and halfway through college in general. I was feeling good, free, and grown up. As I left my last class and checked my phone, I should have expected a text from Rose. A couple weeks into our first semester, just after we'd met, she had lent me a chair from her apartment. Mine was totally unfurnished, hence me sleeping on a bare mattress for 9 months, while hers came with 3 chairs, which she claimed was more than the number of people she ever wanted in her apartment at once. Now it was time for a safety deposit check, and her landlord wasn't the type who would fail to notice a disappearing chair. I had planned on tracking down an older friend of mine and asking if he'd buy us some celebratory booze, but I decided to put it off. Rose had been my best friend, even if we barely spoke anymore, and the least I could do was give her her chair back. So I loaded the chair in my car and drove over to her place. She lived on the second floor of a 2-story house, and I knew she wouldn't offer to help me carry the thing, so I lugged it up to the exterior landing and texted her to come out. A minute passed, then another, then 5. It wasn't unusual for Rose to keep me waiting. One time, she'd invited me to dinner, then ghosted me for 3 hours, and gotten pissed when I ate without her. But she was specifically waiting to get her chair back. The interaction would solely benefit her. It was her favorite kind of interaction. I waited for 10 minutes on the deck, texting her every 2. I sent her an ultimatum, claiming I would leave her chair out here to get rained on if she didn't open the door. But I knew I was talking out of my ass. Rose had me conditioned to dread her wrath in any situation where she felt she'd been affronted, Whether or not she was in the wrong, even knowing I wouldn't see her for 3 months, I couldn't stand the idea of having her turn the cap locks on. It took me an embarrassing long time to realize the door was unlocked, and when I did, something ticked in the back of my head. She could have forgotten on her way out or in, but Rose would never have left the door unlocked on purpose. I called her name, stepping in. When she didn't answer, I went ahead and dragged the chair inside. She would be mad that I went inside without her express permission, but it was better than waiting all day to do her a favor. There's music playing as I pushed a chair into her one-man living room. Baby It's Cold Outside by Dean Martin. A weird choice for mid-June, but honestly, I've always loved the tune. I looked around the living room. No Rose to be seen. Alright, I decided. I'd give her one last chance via the original form of mass communication. The one my generation has totally abandoned, despite being easier and more personal than texting or tweeting, or whatever the hell else we're doing nowadays. She didn't pick up, which didn't surprise me, but I felt a spark of hope before I realized the voice on the other end was just a voicemail.
Hey, it's Rose.
She said, and I didn't know it was the last time I'd ever hear her voice.
Leave a message if you want, or just text me, because it's way easier.
I hung up, knowing she wouldn't listen to a voicemail, and that I wouldn't know what to say in a voicemail anyways. Might as well get out of here, I figured. She had the chair, she had a few months of my life, she had some serious issues she needed to work through, preferably without the help of her psychic and conspiracy theories. I turned to go, but stopped. Something had moved in my periphery, and I turned to look directly into a pair of glowing yellow eyes. Lexi was sitting on the kitchen counter, staring directly at me, her fluffy brown tail dipping back and forth in time with some meter I couldn't hear. The background music changed to Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas. What is it? I asked the cat, feeling her slit eyes on me like a pair of microscopic lenses. Keeping eye contact, I almost felt rebellious against the cat, like I knew she was on some higher level of being, and I was an insignificant little organism in a petri dish. She wasn't just watching, she was observing. And then, I won the staring contest. Lexi turned in a half circle and hopped off the other side of the counter, into a small part of the apartment abruptly designated the kitchen. Maybe I was curious, or maybe I was bored, or maybe I just knew my place as one of the lesser minds in a petri dish, but either way, I walked around the counter in time to see Lexi turning in a circle 3 times, apparently finding the most comfortable position before sitting down for a nap and the pool of blood congealing on Rose's shirt. I somehow forgot my immediate reaction to seeing my friend like that, collapsed on the floor, her head bent at an uncomfortable angle against the lower cupboard. I must have blacked out, or experienced a moment of severe disassociation, because by the time I fully recognized the dried blood on Rose's chin, the slash marks through her shirt, and the blood soaking into Lexi's fur, the song had changed. Last Christmas, I gave you my heart, but the very next day, you gave it away. I didn't want to look away. I didn't want to turn my back on that horror, knowing that in this new world, this new universe I allowed myself to accept without any sort of evidence, there was no reason to believe Rose wouldn't stand up and take her revenge on the so-called friend who had let her slip away after discussing her dark past. But I had to look away. I had to track the brown cat as she seemed to wake up, slunk off the body of her owner, stepping past me with confidence in her stride, and wrapping herself snake-like in and around the dead girl's combat boots. The other dead girl, that is. Same as in the hellish images that my mind had drawn before, Mackenzie Weaver had no face. Whether human features existed, or her undead skull, I couldn't tell. But the face she chose, the avatar of whatever remained of a soul, still clung to her, was hard leather and chainmail, expressionless, emotionless, representing a body driven not by a brain, but the abstract concept of vengeance. Vengeance for what? What had Rose done to her? Did it matter? I stood there, frozen, staring into the slitted holes that functioned as her eyes. The bullet wound that ended her life was visible in the molted white skin above her mask. Pink and festering, but not bleeding, never bleeding. Blood begets life, and Mackenzie had neither. But Rose had blood that was spilling out of her chest, blood that I could see running down the curved blade of Mackenzie's cutlass and dripping into Lexi's fur. We were 4 feet apart. I was close enough to my friend's killer that I could have seen the rise and fall of her breath, could have felt the slight human shifting and warmth of her body heat. I never realized until I stared a living corpse in the face how obnoxiously alive humans really are. But for Mackenzie, there was nothing, no breath, no warmth, not the slightest movement. She stood there, my friend's blood running over her glove, and she didn't move. And then she turned and left the apartment. The blood trailed after her, but she didn't seem to care. She walked out onto the upper deck and down the stairs, disappearing from my sight and not bothering to shut the door. It took a long time for me to convince the police that I hadn't killed Rose, especially since back then there wasn't the unspoken acceptance among law enforcement that Mackenzie's old classmates would continue to die, and the killer would continue to get away free. Rose Williams was Mackenzie's first victim after her boyfriend and the ensuing spree, the first death to imply that there would be more down the line. Well, she did always consider herself a trendsetter. I guess it isn't so much your life flashes before your eyes as is a replay of your most intense moments. A greatest hits album of memories, as it were. A clip show of the joy, the terrifying, the gratuitous, and the murderous. I'm not surprised that Rose Williams popped into my head before anything else. So far, my life has been fairly average, both before and after June Day in 2014, so it makes sense that anything else wouldn't be worth flashing back on. But as I stand here, something like 2.5 years later, frozen in a single moment, unable to move or interact with my surroundings, I almost want to laugh. I never wanted any of this. Mackenzie, Rose, the supernatural elements of this world that average people will go so far to deny. I wanted to live a normal life, to grow up, to go to college, have a career, start a family. I didn't want it all to end before I hit 30, staring my own murderer in the face. My friends are too far away, and the music is too loud. I'm alone in this cramped space, in a compromised position, and the crowd outside is too drunk to care. I don't know if I'm supposed to feel at peace or overwhelming panic, but I feel neither. What I feel is confusion. I didn't lift a hand to stop her back then. I've never hurt her or insulted her. I've only tried to keep others from meeting the same fate as Rose. So why is she moving towards me? Why is she raising that cutlass to strike? Bullet holes riddle her clothing. A chunk has been taken out of her mask, exposing torn flesh and rotten bone beneath. She killed my friend. She's going to kill me. I wish my flashback could have lasted a few minutes longer. Tonight's story was part 1 of The Legend of Mackenzie Weaker, written by Nathaniel Nelson, featuring the talented Zori audio VA. The links to both Nathan and Zori will be in the description below. Please check them out and let them know Pia sent you. Hey, did you know I have merch? Well, I do. Crazy, right? And if you like to walk around representing my realm and gaining new travelers, the links to my merch store as well as all my other social medias will be in the description below. As always, I'd like to say a special thank you to all my lovely Patreons. 242 Reads, Rando Calrissian, Seraphine the Midnight Bard, Creepy Clown Girl, Mia Mina, Hair Raising Narratives, Spooky Boo Scary Story Time, Lycan Trucker, and Pimp Demon. If you'd like to join these lovely travelers but light them on fire, you can do so by becoming a Patreon as well. Please remember, support is always appreciated, but it's never expected. Please don't forget to comment, like, share, subscribe, and ding that bell if you're new for all future content, as it really helps this channel grow and pushes my videos out into the algorithm.
But as always, travelers, once you step into my realm, there's no stepping out.